Hello, I'm Darren Grimes, and you're with GB News at ARC Conference today. It's been a fantastic event, and I'm joined now by Danny Kruger MP, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Devizes. Danny, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Darren.
We've heard a lot about family, faith and flag at this conference, and actually the key tenets of conservatism, which is responsible individuals, all part of a cohesive society. I've been a bit worried, Danny, about the cohesion of said society over recent days, as I've seen our streets packed with those, frankly saying, truly vile things in favour of what is a terrorist organisation. Tell me if I'm wrong. Is Britain and is civilization itself, Western civilization, really rather in peril right now?
Well, I think a society that doesn't share values, in which significant numbers, I mean, we can always tolerate a few lunatics as long as they don't get violent. You know, this country hosted Karl Marx for some years, and ultimately it didn't do us any harm. Did other countries a lot of harm?
Well, indeed.
So we can tolerate eccentric ideologues. What we can't tolerate is large numbers of people who hate the country that they live in. And I think if you look at those protests, I mean, to generalise wildly, you've probably got three groups. You've got some well-meaning, I think, deluded fellow travellers, people who sympathise with the Palestinian cause and think that it's appropriate to go out on these marches. And you've seen Anglican vicars on the marches. I don't think they represent a threat. I think they're just making a political point. I wish they wouldn't, but should be allowed to do that. Then at the other extreme, you've got some very, very dangerous people, the people who are openly calling for jihad, to bring down the West, to support what Hamas have done for Intifada. And then, and I think we need a security response to those people, and I think we need to think about the legal framework in which we operate to ensure that we can ideally remove them from our society. But then you have, more worryingly really, probably the larger group of people, again I'm speculating here, on those marches, who might not want Intifada, but they do hate this country. They hate its values. They might have a life here, and they presumably love their own families and their neighbours, and they might not want to break the law themselves. But my concern is about a significant minority of people who have not grown up sharing the belief that this country is something to belong to. This country is something to be proud of, who don't share the belief in our political framework and our cultural heritage. And we can be a diverse country, and we've heard today from the stage about successful multiculturalism in this country. Catherine Burblesing talking about her achievements at a free school in London, where she brings together people from all different, not just races, but cultures. She made the point, it is multiculturalism, but it's under the umbrella of Britishness. And everybody respects the country that they belong to in a successful multicultural society. And you're right, I think, to identify these marches as indication of a large number of people who have not successfully been accommodated into a shared culture. And I think that is a real cause for concern.
So then, is the problem that we haven't been selling a successful narrative of who we are, what we're about, and what our history was? Instead, we hear narratives of denigration and destruction, frankly. And has the Conservative Party, frankly, over the last 13 years, even been part of that debate?
So I think there are two elements to this. The top-down element is what you're describing, which is the narrative that we tell each other as a country, and the role of the government is significant in that. And I think I don't think we've ever had a Conservative MP or certainly not leader who has been anything other than patriotic and committed to our shared values and articulates that powerfully. But I think it is also true to say we haven't done enough to undo some of the legal, constitutional and ultimately cultural inheritance that we arrived in power with in 2010. The narrative of division, as you say, the idea that in fact there's greater value in difference than in unity. I think that, I'm afraid to say, it has seeped into our culture, and I don't think we as Conservatives have done enough to repudiate it. So the top-down story needs to be better, but the other side of it is bottom-up, and this is where I think the real change needs to happen. It's less exciting and it's longer term, but what it's really about is having strong families, strong neighbourhoods, and yes, a strong nation, but it starts with family life. And I think people who are well socialised, who understand their obligations to each other at home, become good neighbours, and then they become good citizens. So ultimately, not to say that everybody who comes from a strong family is automatically going to grow up a good citizen, or that you can only be a good citizen if you have a strong family, but generally, and we have to generalise in politics, that's what politics is, I think we have a problem of family breakdown. We have a problem of community breakdown. And that manifests itself in this alienation. And I've worked a lot in prisons and with ex-prisoners, and I see in political extremism a similar syndrome to the gang culture, is people looking for identity and belonging and looking for a cause and looking for excitement. And they'll find that in political extremism if they don't find it in normal life.
Something to fill the God-shaped hole, you might say.
Well, we all need something to believe in, and we're all going to worship something. And I think it's helpful to worship the God of our culture, but we can accommodate all sorts of different faiths as long as they're not violent. But we do need something to believe in that isn't about tribalism and finding enemies among our neighbours.
We on GB News, gbnews.com, have been documenting certain rhetoric by certain imams, for example, that I would deem to be, if not extremism, certainly borderline extremism, Danny. And a lot of the viewers are writing in and saying, well, hang on a minute. You know, I have voted for 13 years' worth of Conservative government, and I've been promised every single time that Britain will have lower migration, we'll have migration that works for the country, they'll be, share our values, they won't hate the country. That's surely not a lot to be asking. And as well, when you see in London, Liverpool Street yesterday, where you have the whole station occupied by pro-Palestinian protesters, British Jews feeling absolutely, utterly terrified. Are we actually losing, one, law and order in Britain, and secondly, we've just lost control altogether of migration and our borders? Brexit had that promise. It was the ultimate promise.
I know. People voted for Brexit because they wanted control of our borders, and they also wanted, and particularly in 2019 when I was elected and we had that great landslide under Boris, it was clear that people were voting for lower migration, and in fact we committed to that. In fact, migration has tripled, net migration has tripled since we were elected, so there is no excuse for that. You can explain it. Certainly a lot of those people coming in are refugees who we are proud to accommodate from Hong Kong and Ukraine. But fundamentally we have a crisis of excess migration. It started under Tony Blair, of course, opening the borders to the Europeans. But as you say, when Brexit came in, we were able to restrict European migration, but migration from the rest of the world has gone up. And that is just unacceptable. So the group that I co-chair in Parliament, the New Conservatives, group of MPs, all elected since 2016, we are committed to reducing migration back to the levels, below the levels that it was when we came in, which is still too high. 200,000 people a year net is still too high, but at the moment we're 600,000 a year. So it is an absolutely intolerable situation. I completely understand why the public feel this is really, really not okay. And we have a chance now over the next year to put in place policies that will bring migration sharply down. It will come down anyway because the refugee flow is lower, but we need to do a lot more, I think, and we've put out policies to reduce student visas, to reduce family visas, to raise the salary threshold for people coming in on a work visa. There are some straightforward things that we can do that would radically reduce migration, and I think we have got to do that if we're to have a chance at the next election.
Well, just finally then, Danny, I look at what the New Conservatives say and I think, wow, they're speaking my language, and I'm sure many people do. But is the Conservative Party speaking the nation's language?
I think it's speaking the language, and I do want to give credit to Rishi for his commitment both on stopping the boats, reducing illegal migration, which is happening. I mean, we've got to acknowledge there's been a significant reduction. Not enough. We will never be satisfied until we have actually stopped the boats. Reducing the boats isn't enough, but progress is being made. On a bunch of other cultural questions, I think he's in the right place as well. But no, fundamentally, we are not where we need to be on policy, and so we are pushing in I hope, a constructive way, because we don't want to be divisive. We really do support the PM and everything that he's done. We just think we need to go further to deliver on the manifesto that we were elected on, and to deliver for that great realignment in our politics that the 2016 and the 2019 votes represented. That is the future. Okay. Those voters, particularly in the North and the Midlands, who are Conservatives, they always used to vote Labour, but they have Conservative instincts. They voted for us last time, and we can get them to vote for us again, but we have to deliver for them.
Danny Kruger MP, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Darren.